Still waiting to make projections in 9 states, but let's take a look at this key race alert right now, where it stands. Michigan with its 16 electoral votes. Donald Trump continuing to maintain his lead of almost 34,000 votes over Hillary Clinton, with 75% of the vote in. Trump still ahead in Michigan. In Wisconsin, 83% of the vote is in. Got a better lead there, 86,000 votes over Hillary Clinton, 10 electoral votes at stake in Wisconsin. In Arizona, Trump is ahead by nearly 60,000 votes, with 64% of the vote in, 11 electoral votes at stake in Arizona. Trump doing well in that state. In New Hampshire right now, it's a cliffhanger. Look at this. Trump is ahead by 864 votes. Let me repeat that. 864 votes. He's got 47.5%. She has 47.4%. 81% of the vote is in. Those 4 electoral votes could be critical in New Hampshire. Let's take a look at some more states right now. In Utah, 29% of the vote is in. Trump maintains a pretty healthy lead of 81,000 votes over both Hillary Clinton and Evan McMullin, the third-party conservative. In Pennsylvania, 93% of the vote is in, and Trump has a lead of more than 25,000 votes over Hillary Clinton, 20 electoral votes at stake in Pennsylvania. In Minnesota, 77% of the vote is in. Hillary Clinton has an impressive lead of almost 90,000 votes over Donald Trump, 48.1% to 44%, 10 electoral votes in Minnesota right now. In Maine, 75% of the vote is in. Hillary Clinton has a lead of more than 17,000 votes over Donald Trump. Let's take a look at the all-important Electoral College map, where it stands right now. Donald Trump is ahead. He has 238 electoral votes to 215 for Hillary Clinton. You need 270 to win the White House. Those yellow states are states that we have not yet made projections. Still too early to call. Anderson, over to you.
Well, thanks very much. Let's go to Jeffrey Lord, Kayleigh McEnany, both Trump supporters. I mean, all along, Jeffrey, from the beginning, we have talked about how Donald Trump, from the beginning, has rewritten the rules of politics. And there was a lot of question about whether Hillary Clinton, with all her big data, with all of her alleged ground game, would simply just swamp Donald Trump with his huge rallies, but apparently a lack of a ground game.
She was the Jeb Bush of the Democratic Party, and she was the face of the establishment. As I said last night, when we saw those folks on that stage in front of Independence Hall in Philadelphia, and everybody's remarking about, you know, his history and her history and all this sort of thing. And I said, look, if you're sitting there in Cumberland County, Pennsylvania, which is where I live, you're looking at these people and seeing there's a bunch of insiders there. And they're all scratching one another's backs, and they're making millions of dollars in the case of the Clintons, so alleged. And they're just sick of the whole, thing. One other thing, I have in front of me here a New York Times article from December 16th of 1976, in which Ronald Reagan...
I knew you were going to go back in history tonight.
Exactly.
I wanted you to.
I mean, because I keep trying to say that it's important that Ronald Reagan said after the defeat of Gerald Ford that he was going to rebuild the Republican Party by courting conservatives who now call themselves Democrats and independents. That is exactly what Donald Trump was about in this. And that's why that Rust Belt strategy, which is exactly what worked for Ronald Reagan.
And Kayleigh, I mean, all along, in the face of all these polls, which the pollsters seemed to be just wrong, certainly in the Electoral College path, you were saying that there were hidden Trump voters out there, that there was sort of this hidden enthusiasm for Trump beyond what we were seeing, the visible enthusiasm we were seeing. Democrats were saying there's going to be this huge outpouring of Latino vote. It's going to make up all the difference. But a lot of people voted for Donald Trump.
Yes, it's looking increasingly like we have a Brexit on our hands. And there were these voters out there that were afraid to talk to pollsters. And Anderson, I think the American people right now are sending a loud, clear, unmistakable message. They want their government back. This is supposed to be a government of, by, and for the people. It's increasingly become one of, by, and for the elite. This is the people rising up saying it's time to listen to us. It's time to listen to us in Michigan and Wisconsin and work for the people. It's not about personal enrichment. It's about public service. And that is what we were seeing. Donald Trump ran against Republicans. He ran against Democrats. He ran against the elite. He ran against the government. He ran against the media. But he was an unmistakable voice for the people.
Also, and they put a lot of signs in their yards.
Right. You should start a sign company, because that was your poll, which you know, in Pennsylvania, certainly your state. But there's been so much focus on, probably among a lot of Democrats, about what went wrong on the Democratic side. But you shouldn't take away from what Donald Trump has accomplished from the moment he entered this race. I mean, again, just redefining the way somebody runs.
I mean, one of the things that I thought was the sort of overweening arrogance of a lot of elites were the terribly off-base descriptions of Donald Trump, that he's a racist and a xenophobe and he's this and he's that. Here is a guy that I felt right from the get-go was a highly successful, highly accomplished businessman who knew how to relate to average people, to working class Americans. And the problem is they believed their own message, and they were totally wrong.
Well, there's still a lot of people out there in the country tonight who still have that belief about Donald Trump, Van.
Well, look, first of all, congratulations. Both of you guys were...
We're not there yet.
Well, you're further than anybody said you would be. And I have enough class, and I was raised well enough to say when you outdo...
Yes, sir. Thank you.
When you outdo expectations, good for you. But there's another side to this. People have talked about a miracle. I'm hearing about a nightmare. It's hard to be a parent tonight for a lot of us. You tell your kids, don't be a bully. You tell your kids, don't be a bigot. You tell your kids, do your homework and be prepared. And then you have this outcome, and you have people putting children to bed tonight, and they're afraid of breakfast. They're afraid of, how do I explain this to my children? I have Muslim friends who are texting me tonight saying, should I leave the country? I have families of immigrants that are terrified tonight. This was many things. This was a rebellion against the elites. True, it was a complete reinvention of politics and polls, it's true. But it was also something else. We've talked about race. I mean, we've talked about everything but race tonight. We've talked about income. We've talked about class. We've talked about region. We haven't talked about race. This was a white lash. This was a white lash against a changing country. It was a white lash against a black president in part. And that's the part where the pain comes. And Donald Trump has a responsibility tonight to come out and reassure people that he is going to be the president of all the people who he insulted and offended and brushed aside. Yeah, when you say you want to take your country back, you got a lot of people who feel that we're not represented well either. But we don't want to feel that someone has been elected by throwing away some of us to appeal more deeply to others. So this is a deeply painful moment tonight. I know it's not just about race. There's more going on than that. But race is here, too. We got to talk about it.
Well, and whoever wins tonight, I mean, there is such polarization in this country. Whoever wins is going to have a very hard time in convincing the other half of the country that they can be their president as well.
That's what I thought I knew yesterday, that I had no idea how deep the divisions are, how real the pain is. And let me say, echoing Van, Kayleigh and Jeffrey were right about that. You saw it in a way that I didn't see it in the data, and you deserve to have credit for that. And maybe Hillary hangs on and wins, maybe Mr. Trump wins. We still don't know. It's really in the balance.
Right.
But irrespective, the pain, and Van just gave beautiful poetic voice to the pain on our side. But Donald Trump was given voice to some really spectacular pain on his side. And that's, I think, what's causing this. When Jeb Bush, who you mentioned, got trounced by Trump, he said, I don't do anger very well. Well, this is a time of anger. Of course, that anger comes from pain. And Trump saw that, and he gave voice to it.
He also reached across lines, though, that Republican candidates haven't reached across before. He made a direct appeal to the African-American community. He made a direct appeal to a whole group of voters, those in the inner cities who have been left behind, who haven't heard from candidates in decades on either sides of the aisle. And he took his message to them and said, I feel your pain, and I'm going to be there.
Listen, we're gonna have to hold hands now. This is gonna be tough. But we'll have to look and see if those people heard it the way you heard it, and if they voted for him. The problem that we have is that there is real pain in the country. Look, Hillary Clinton had to put down a rebellion in her own party. There was a rebellion in her own party along these lines, the Bernie Sanders rebellion. And she put that rebellion down. And she was able to co-opt and pull some of it, but there was still heartburn and rug burn there. There's healing that has to happen in the Democratic Party. And there has to be a real conversation about what happened in that primary. And there's pain, economic pain in your party. But you do yourself a disservice, and I don't want either of you to be naive. There are people in your party for whom this was also a vote against political correctness, which for some of them means a vote against these others. And we're going to need your help to heal that. And if I can't acknowledge the elitism in my party, and you can't acknowledge some of the bigotry in your party, we're never going to get there.
Donald Trump's going to be a voice for all the people.
I-
He said that from
pray to
day one.
God.
He's
He will
going
make
to
it
be
pray to
his
that.
God.
first objective to bring people together. I have not the slightest doubt about it. I mean, he's said it, but I certainly believe him. I mean, I've seen that in him all along.
We're going to have to work together.
But
Let's bring in the other side as well.
I just want to talk about some of the things that we watched tonight. We saw lower African American turnout, Van. I mean, you were seeing that. We also saw that 65% of Latinos voted for Hillary Clinton, but 29% voted for Donald Trump. That is more than Mitt Romney got. So you have to think about that. You have to think about that.
And more than many Democratic Latinos certainly thought that Donald Trump could
Young
get.
voters, also, we've known Hillary Clinton has had a problem with young voters. She got a majority of young voters, but 37% of them, according to the exit polls we're looking at now, voted for Donald Trump. Now, when I've been talking to some Democratic strategists who are pro-Clinton this evening, they blamed what's going on this evening. And again, we don't know the result, but they blame the closeness of the race, let me put it that way, on two things. On the Comey interference a couple weeks ago, and on the third-party candidates. And I've been communicating with them saying that's not enough.
Isn't it
I
easy?
can't do that.
Isn't
That
it easy to just blame Comey for changing the
it's
different
far-
conversations? David?
As a Clinton person, let me say that's far too tactical.
Exactly.
There's
That's
something
what I said.
really big going on.
Right.
And it's been-
There
So
is
you-
an earthquake going on, and they're saying, well, it's a washing machine.
Right.
No,
So you
no, it's
combine
plate
it-
tectonic.
So you combine it with the race issues, you combine it with rural Americans who came out and voted, the sort of Brexit, hidden voters. You combine it with class issues, which were so important.
Well, but
There's a reason this is going on all over the world.
Right.
All over
The fact
West.
is that
All over the West.
Right.
there are convulsive, sort of revolutionary changes going on in our economy that are driven largely by technology and globalization that have benefited, that have grown economies and have benefited some people and have displaced others. And for not just a few years, but for several decades, politicians have been acknowledging this and saying, we're going to do something about it. And people don't feel as if that's happening. And meanwhile, all of these forces churn at a faster pace. So you see the same kinds of forces in Britain, in Germany, in France.
But it's so interesting. I mean, Michael Mercado, David was on the program the other night talking about how, well, the polling here is better than in England, where they didn't know what the Brexit result was going to be. Clearly, if this path continues that Donald Trump is on and he becomes the next president, and this is, to Kayleigh's point, a Brexit.
We have said from day one is that Donald Trump represents a fundamental change to Washington, D.C. And for 30 years, elected officials, both Republicans and Democrats, have made promises that they haven't kept. They have brought us into a greater deficit where we've got almost $21 trillion in debt. We're leaving our country in a worse shape than our parents left it for us for the first time in the history of our country. And what people have said was, we don't want that anymore. We don't want people who make promises that have the most extensive credentials ever to serve as the President of the United States. People don't want that. They want someone who's going to tell them the truth, that's going to go and do what they say they're going to do, to bring fundamental change, and let the people decide how the country is run. That's what we're seeing tonight, is the people have listened to what the media said. They've listened to the narrative, how great the other side was, how everybody is going to join, and how the Hispanics are going to come out in record proportion, and how Donald Trump is a misogynist and a bigot, and all the things that we've heard the mainstream media talk about. And they've stepped back and said, you don't understand. We are tired of Washington, D.C. We're tired of broken promises. We're tired of people going there and forgetting about us. And we want wholesale and fundamental change. That's what's taking place.
Well, Jeffrey, I mean, it also looks like he will have a Republican House, a Republican Senate. I mean, the potential for him to affect his policies is great. But there are, of course, real divisions within the Republican Party.
Right.
And some of the,
And they will, and some of them will.
they're going to start to have to use his name.
You're right. I mean, yes, they are. I'm looking for that.
Much more likely tomorrow, I think. than it was yesterday.
Right, I'm sure.
One of the things I remember attending as a White House staff meeting is the National Governors Association's meetings, and I think they're in February, and they come to the White House for a meeting and a glittery dinner. I'm just waiting to see Governor Kasich greet President Trump.
Well, I mean, the meeting, there's a traditional meeting between, it would be
It will be on
between,
Thursday.
Right, on Thursday between President Obama
And the president-elect.
and the president-elect.
Right.
I mean, to be a fly on the wall during that meeting.
Exactly. Well, I mean, change is at hand here. And I keep going back to Reagan for a purpose, because he was the last president, certainly on the Republican side, to bring that kind of change and face that kind of resistance, not only as he sought the nomination and ran for election, but once he got there.
I guess one of the questions, obviously, is how capable. I mean, a lot of promises are made during an election. Donald Trump has talked about things as a negotiation, and that, some of the conservative criticism of him early on was that, that too much is up for negotiation with him. Negotiation or compromise can be a dirty word in Washington. The wall, reversing Obamacare, the Supreme Court, how much can he actually do, and as quickly as he said?
Well, remember at one point, Paul Ryan met with Donald Trump and came out basically saying, or his aides basically said, what Donald Trump said, just help me get elected, and then we'll use your agenda. Okay, we will use your agenda. I think Paul Ryan is going to hold him to that. And I think that I've just heard from a Republican who said that there could be a populist conservative governing coalition if they can all get on the same page. And I think the fact, again, as we were saying before, that Donald Trump had coattails, that he brought in some of these Republicans into Congress who are very worried about their jobs, that they now owe him something.
Right.
Look, and that they will. The question is, what do they do to the Obama legacy? What do they do with Obamacare? What do they do about the premium increases, which Donald Trump has spoken about? What do they do about trade? Do they withdraw from the TPP right away? What do they do about the wall? These are things that Republicans have disagreed on.
Well, I think there's a couple of ways to think about it. If you're kind of looking for now, what happens now? How do you think about this? I think if you're a progressive, there are three areas where you might try to figure out something positive. First of all, the fact that now Trump is going to own health care. He's going to own health care for at least 20 million people. And the Republicans can't just sort of stand back and let the bad parts of Obamacare go on unchecked just because they want to stick it on Obama. The Republicans are now going to have to really step up and do something. That could wind up being a positive. We just don't know. Secondly, he made a bunch of promises about urban investment and urban renewal and empowerment, et cetera. I think he should be held to those kinds of promises, and let's see if he's actually serious about those things. And then lastly, this whole question around trade. I think for the left wing of the Democratic Party, there's probably something there that can make some kind of sense. I think there are three things that are just irredeemably bad that we are going to have to resist this president on as progressives. One is all the stuff around immigration and the Muslim bashing. If that becomes a serious part of his presidency, there will be a big pushback from decent people in this country who do not want to see that type of rhetoric and agenda coming from Washington, D.C. Secondly, the Supreme Court is going to be a massive fight. And lastly, which we haven't talked about, is this whole question of climate and whether or not we're going to be able to make real progress on climate and climate change. The last thing I want to say, because I don't know if I get a chance to talk again, there are people around the world who are watching this. They are appalled, they are shocked, they are surprised. The markets are showing it, and there's some people who are laughing, and some of them are in the Kremlin. This is not just the first election in which you had a woman running and a business person running. This is the first election in which an enemy power deliberately and explicitly interfered in our election and got away with it. And they interfered in our election in a one-sided way. They didn't hack Democrats. They didn't hack Republicans. They hacked Democrats. And we're going to have to figure out now, what is our relationship to Russia going forward? And if Russia got away with it this time, what if the Chinese do it to the Republicans next time? We are now living in a completely different context from a national security point of view, and that needs to be talked about.
Jeffrey, assuming Donald Trump becomes the president, do you think, and he's already talked about, there's been some talk about who would be his attorney general, who would be his secretary of state. Do you see him reaching out to kind of a diverse group of Republicans or whomever to kind of form a cabinet? Where do you see?
Yes. Again, the model for me, which was instantly clear to me as I got to know him, is his own company. He has a lot of people there, a lot of very different people who are very talented in A, B, or C areas that he brings in to accomplish tasks. That's what he will do. I mean, he's an executive. He has an executive's mind. I have no doubt whatsoever. Now, will he, as any president should, having won an election, want to steer the country in the direction that he promised he would steer it? Sure. Will he try to find people who will do that in these individual cabinet departments? And, you know, the age-old problem in Washington is presidents appoint people to run departments, and then they wind up doing it the reverse. They wind up representing the department to the president instead of representing the president and the people to the department. But yes, I'm sure he will do this.
Paul?
Yeah, that may well be, but I would point out, first off, the election's not over.
Right, well,
States,
right. We're
in play.
Exactly.
And it seems to me, just back of the envelope math, highly likely that Hillary Clinton wins the popular vote, irrespective of even if Mr. Trump can pull off this Rust Belt states. Only 24% of the vote in California is in. She's likely to win that overwhelmingly. Washington, Oregon. So you could very well be in a situation, we know, no matter who wins, that this country is deeply, deeply divided. And that has been the case for many years. We had, when Bill Clinton was sworn in, he was on the book of the prophet Isaiah, and thou shalt be called healer of the breach. Then the next president had 2 terms. He said, I want to be a uniter, not a divider. Then the next president had 2 terms, and he said, there are no red states, no blue states, there are only the United States. And yet still, despite 24 years of 3 very different presidents, all talking about that divide and trying to address it, it is deeper and more painful than ever. And yes, we'll have this on trade, we'll have this about Russia, but more fundamentally, the pain here is so spectacular that it's going to take a real miracle.
We've got another projection from Wolf.
All right, we do have another major projection right now. All right, Donald Trump, we project, will be the winner in the state of Utah. With its 6 electoral votes, Donald Trump carries another state. You see the popular vote there. Donald Trump ahead. He's got a 113,000 vote lead over both Evan McMullin, who looks like he's second place right now with 41% of the vote in. Hillary Clinton right now 82,000 votes in third place. Let's take a look at the Electoral College count where it stands right now with this Donald Trump win in Utah. Right now, Donald Trump is ahead, inching closer and closer to 270 electoral votes. He now has 244 electoral votes compared to Hillary Clinton's 215 electoral votes. Donald Trump doing very, very well tonight. It's 270, though. That's the magic number. Let's take a look in a key race alert at the numbers coming in right now. Remaining states. We'll start with Michigan right now. 80% of the vote is now in. Trump has an impressive lead of 77,000 plus votes over Hillary Clinton. There are 16 electoral votes in Michigan. Trump ahead. In Wisconsin, 87% of the vote is in. Similarly, he has an impressive 84,000 vote lead over Hillary Clinton. 10 electoral votes at stake in Wisconsin. In Arizona, Trump again leading. 60,000 vote lead over Hillary Clinton with 65% of the vote in. Arizona has 11 electoral votes. In Pennsylvania, look at this, 97% of the vote is in. Trump is ahead by almost 51,000 votes over Hillary Clinton. There are 20 electoral votes at stake in Pennsylvania. Trump doing very well in Pennsylvania right now. Let's take a look at some more states where we have not made projections. In New Hampshire, Hillary Clinton is ahead, but by only 700 votes over Donald Trump, with 85% of the vote in. 4 electoral votes in New Hampshire. In Maine, 81% of the vote is in. Hillary Clinton has a lead of almost 17,000 votes over Donald Trump in the state of Maine. Finally, take a look at this in Minnesota. 84% of the vote is in. Hillary Clinton has a pretty good 71,000 vote lead over Donald Trump. 84% of the vote in. Minnesota has 10 electoral votes. Let's go over to Jake and Dana. The numbers clearly right now, Jake, are in Donald Trump's favor.
Absolutely. Hillary Clinton needs to win Michigan. She needs to win New Hampshire. She needs to win Pennsylvania. Right now, she's only ahead in one of those states with almost all of the vote in. It's really stunning. And Van has been talking about some of the dimensions of this race, some of the social dimensions that have people who supported Hillary Clinton very upset this evening. But let's take a moment and talk about the outsider nature of the campaign that Donald Trump waged and looks like he might win having to do with how dissatisfied the American people are with Washington, D.C., with institutions that they think are failing them. Institutions, whether it is the Justice Department and the government of Washington, D.C., whether they're political or career individuals, and how they are not serving the purposes of the American people. That's one. And then a second one I think is very significant, and we haven't really talked about it at all, and that is the role of the United States in the world. You could make the argument that Donald Trump is somebody who has talked about how he thinks that we have been involved in too many entanglements in other countries, and Hillary Clinton has been defending that sort of thing. It's one of the reasons why a lot of veterans anecdotally supported Donald Trump, in addition to the fact that many of them are just conservative Republicans, and that is they agree with the idea that we shouldn't be involved in too many countries overseas. We should be focused more on the United States. There are a lot of policy dimensions to this. Van's touching on some of the social dimensions to this, but there are a lot of policy dimensions to this. And then, of course, there's trade and the idea that the trade deals that might be very, very lucrative to corporations and to Wall Street have not been as lucrative and successful for people in Ohio, for people in Michigan, for people in Pennsylvania, the states that today are really rising up and saying, not so fast, Washington, D.C.
And Dan, I know you're in touch with folks in the Trump campaign. What are you hearing?
Well, a little bit of news that I'm told that Donald Trump and his campaign did prepare 2 speeches, as we were told earlier by our Clinton team, that Hillary Clinton did, a victory speech and a concession speech, and he is preparing and hoping to give that victory speech. So what will be in it? I'm told that he will be gracious, that he will, to speak to what Van was talking about before, and also Michael and others about the tone of these speeches being so important. We'll talk about coming together. We'll reach out to those who didn't vote for him. So that is the tone that I'm told he will set in this speech. And we'll see what specific words he uses and, you know, how specific he gets, whether he says specifically Hillary Clinton's voters, please understand, I know you didn't support me, but come my way. But the overall tone is going to be that, and the other is gratitude.
That's what the victor...
Victory speech, yes.
But that's what the victors usually say. They reach out, they try to be gracious, they encourage the losing presidential candidate to be gracious as well.
It's true. This is anything but a usual campaign and campaign season, right down to the speeches. So it is, I think, noteworthy to hear, particularly given how incredibly divisive this has been, that if he does get that magic 270 tonight, if those Rust Belt states go his way, not to mention Pennsylvania, that is the theme and the tone and the tenor I'm told he will set.
And what's impressive, very impressive, not only is ahead in the Electoral College map, but popular vote. He is ahead in the popular vote. I think about 54 million Americans have voted for him, maybe 1 million more than voted for Hillary Clinton nationwide. That is so impressive right now.
It's big, but as you note, it's right now. We still have yet to see what happens in California and some of the western states. But just to touch on what Dan has said in terms of the speech, whoever wins this evening, there is a huge responsibility for that man or that woman to reach out not only to the people who voted for his or her opponent, but to the people who don't like him or her. If Donald Trump wins, I think there is going to be, in addition to his celebration and the victory lap that he has every right to take, there are people who were really bothered by things like when he made fun of that disabled reporter. And he really has an obligation, especially if he wants to be a successful president. And I know he wants to be a successful anything that he tries to do. He wants to succeed at. There is an opportunity now for the country to heal, for the country to come together, whether Hillary Clinton wins or Donald Trump wins. And I really hope that the victor does actually take that opportunity to try to unite the country after this extremely brutal election.
The onus is also on the person who doesn't win.
Absolutely.
To do that.
Absolutely.
And you know, we remember in 2008, John McCain's concession speech was probably one of the best speeches he ever gave in his life, because it was so gracious in telling the people who supported him to please support the next president. And because, again, this has been so divisive, so tough, so intense, it is maybe even more important for the person giving the concession speech to give that message to their supporters.
We'll see what time the victory speech happens and the concession speech happens. We're going to be watching all of that so closely. It's still not over yet. They're still counting votes. Anderson, back to you.
Yeah, well, thanks very much. In terms of what happens in the coming weeks for whoever the president-elect is, in terms of a transition team, I mean, some of them have, I assume both sides, and certainly the Clinton side has already, they have people in place. I know Donald Trump has named as well. What is the process for that?
Well, Chris Christie is running the transition
That's a problem.
for Donald Trump, and that's a problem. And he also hasn't been particularly visible of late with Donald Trump because of the whole Bridgegate trial, et cetera. But they have been running a full-bore transition. I think in terms of Hillary Clinton, when you were dealing with an Obama administration who had been here, Democrats, the transition might have been a little smoother and a lot easier. Then if it is President Trump, then the Obama team would have dealing with the President Trump's team who wants to actually undo everything that President Obama has done in office.
It is interesting also when you have President Obama with the highest approval ratings I guess of his presidency, well, probably not of his presidency, but it's certainly for a president at this stage.
Yes. Up there with Reagan.
And certainly was out there on the campaign trail an awful lot. I mean, to not be able to, I mean, he was able to get himself elected, but he didn't have great coattails, certainly for Hillary Clinton.
Well, obviously, I'm sure he's deeply disappointed tonight. I haven't spoken to him, but he campaigned very, very vigorously. He felt very strongly about it. But my guess is that they will meet on Thursday because that is the obligation of the outgoing president to try and affect a transition to the next administration. We've done it for a couple of centuries, and I'm sure he'll feel a responsibility to do it. Let me just make a couple of points, though. One of the things that I'm going to be watching, you talk about people were swept in on his coattails and so on. Some of them were incumbents who were reelected. There are many members, or there are more than a few members of Congress who didn't endorse him of his own party. Paul Ryan separated himself from Donald Trump and excoriated him in very, very sharp terms several times. They don't have the same agendas in many ways. The notion of, I'll be interested to see. I can't think of a time when you had a president who was so at odds with so much of his own base, because ultimately he ran against the Washington establishment, and Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan and some of those guys, they're part of the Washington establishment.
But now they're going to have to deal with them, and they're going to have to figure out what part of the Trump agenda works with what they want to do. I mean, as Donald Trump always says, he's a negotiator, even if he has to negotiate.
I just add to the list of, we're in uncharted territory. Yeah. We seem to be assuming we're going to hear an acceptance speech from Donald Trump, perhaps, if this goes the way it's. You know what all the caveats are. Here's what I'm trying to say. You can put on that list trying to calm down the market because the Dow futures are down 800. I don't know what it is he says tonight or tomorrow, but he needs to the point of who will he surround himself with, make sure that he can instill some confidence in Wall Street sooner than later.
Yeah, and it'll also be interesting to see what Obama says, right? I mean, they have this meeting on Thursday or so. Obama has been very vocal that he didn't think that Donald Trump was qualified to be president. He didn't have the temperament. Donald Trump, if he becomes president, is a complete and utter repudiation of Obama. I mean, he ran as the anti-Obama. And if you look at all the things that the transition team has been saying, their goal is to undo Obama's legacy.
It is paradoxical because, as Anderson pointed out, the president's approval rating is quite high. But let me just say this. Part of what the president and others criticized Donald Trump for was suggesting that he might not accept the result of the election. I don't think you can do that and then not accept the result of the election. And I think there'll be people, and Van can speak to it, who are going to be in a resistant mood about this because they'll say Donald Trump didn't give Barack Obama a chance, so why should we give Donald Trump a chance? And the answer to that is we only have one president at a time, and you have to try and make it work.
We're going to have more with our panel, a lot more.